In November 1961, a well-known billionaire in the United States immediately launched a massive search and rescue operation after receiving the bad news that his son had gone missing while traveling in a remote part of Dutch New Guinea inhabited by cannibal tribes. He wasted no time and used his wealth, even sending an entire plane, modern equipment, and personnel to search for his son there. But despite all their efforts to find him, they couldn't even catch a glimpse of him. And the events that followed became one of the most famous stories in history, where the true fate of his son remained a mystery for a very long time, until the truth finally came out about his bitter end at the hands of a fierce cannibal tribe. This is the true story behind the mysterious disappearance of Michael Rockefeller. Yeah! Michael Clark Rockefeller was born into a famous and very wealthy family. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, was a very influential businessman and politician who became the governor of New York and later became the vice president of the United States. His grandfather, John D. Rockefeller, was the founder of Standard Oil and one of the richest people in history. So from childhood, Michael could have almost anything he wanted. Big houses, expensive schools, connections to the most powerful people in America, and a last name that could open almost any door. But as he grew up, it seemed ironic that his wealth was exactly what he wanted to escape from. Michael wasn't interested in being a typical Rockefeller who would go into business or politics. He was quiet, artistic, and loved photography and culture. And above all, he wanted to do something different. Not just because his family was wealthy, he wanted to make a name for himself. His father, Nelson, also loved art, and in the 1950s he founded the Museum of Primitive Art in New York, which collected artworks from Africa, Oceania, and other distant cultures. And this is where Michael became fascinated. For him, masks, shields, and wood carvings were not just decorations. Each one has a story, a god, an ancestor, war, and beliefs behind it, and he wanted to see for himself where those things came from. In 1960, Michael graduated from Harvard, but instead of returning to the comfortable world of the Rockefeller family, he joined a Harvard Peabody Museum expedition in March 1961 to Dutch New Guinea. That part of the island is now part of Indonesia. His job as a sound recordist and photographer was to document an indigenous community. But what was supposed to be a simple expedition became a turning point in his life. Suddenly, the cold he was used to disappeared. His life in New York, which he never liked from the start, was gone. Mud, intense heat, mosquitoes, dense jungle, and almost no connection to the modern life he was used to. And Michael liked it. As time went by, he became more comfortable with nature. He grew a beard, mingled with the locals, and became even more fascinated by cultures that had barely been touched by Western influence, until he encountered the Asmat people. The Asmat are made up of several tribes and live there, along the remote southwestern coast and in the swamps around the rivers of New Guinea. They are known as some of the finest wood carvers in New Guinea. They create enormous ancestral poles, shields, and ceremonial carvings that are full of symbolism. But they also have another reputation: headhunting and ritual cannibalism. At that time, the tradition of taking the enemy's head was still alive in their culture as part of their spiritual and revenge rituals. But what's even more intense is what they do to the enemy's body. For many outsiders, this is enough reason to stay away. But for Michael, the opposite happened. He became even more fascinated, thinking he could build a very important collection of Asmat art for his father's museum, a collection that he himself would go to the farthest tribes to acquire. So after the first expedition, Michael returned to America. But he couldn't stay still anymore. He wanted to return to New Guinea, and this time, not just as a simple member of a Harvard expedition. He wanted this to be his own expedition. So in October 1961, Michael Rockefeller returned to Dutch New Guinea, and this time his purpose was clear. He would visit the most remote Asmat villages and tribes and collect as much art as he could get. He was accompanied by 34-year-old Dutch anthropologist René Vazine, a man familiar with the area, the language, and the dangers of the Asmat tribes. And it was not an easy place to enter. It was hot, humid, and almost entirely swamps and coastline. The waves were strong, the currents unpredictable, and if you strayed far from the shore, the waters here were infested with sharks and saltwater crocodiles that could appear at any moment. But that wasn't the most dangerous part, because as Michael ventured deeper into Asmat territory, he was also entering a culture with its own laws about life and death. For the Asmat back then, a person's death was never considered natural. When someone died from illness, old age, or accident, it could be explained as the work of an enemy or sorcery. That's why death creates a spiritual imbalance. And to restore the balance, there has to be payback. This is where the cycle of revenge comes in, sometimes called jeer, a blood debt that doesn't just disappear. This doesn't mean that the Asmat kill without reason. From their perspective, taking the head of an enemy can be part of revenge, a spiritual duty, and restoring balance in their world. But that's not what Michael was thinking about. What he sees is art. In every village, he traded steel axes, tobacco, and fish hooks for Asmat shields, canoes, and large ancestral carvings called bish poles. The steel axe is very important to the Asmat. Work that used to take a very long time with traditional tools suddenly becomes much faster with a steel axe. That's why wherever Michael goes, he always stands out. A young white man carrying a lot of Western goods and willing to trade them for their most sacred carvings. As his collection grew, he became more aggressive in his travels. He wanted to acquire more, to go farther, to find rarer and more valuable items. But there was one tribe with a story he couldn't fully understand. The Ochtenep tribe. 3 years before Michael arrived in 1958, there was tension between the people of Ochtenep and a Dutch patrol, because at that time, New Guinea was still controlled by the Netherlands. In the midst of the chaos, a Dutch officer named Max Lepre fired his weapon. An Ochtenep man, a village elder of the tribe, was killed. For the Dutch authorities, the incident might have ended when the shooting stopped. But for the Ochtenep, it wasn't over yet. A blood debt had to be paid. They waited for 3 years, and by 1961, a young white man was repeatedly traveling near their territory. He carried steel axes and other Western goods. Meanwhile, Michael didn't mind this and continued to fill his boat with heavy carvings. And on November 17, 1961, he and his companion Vasing boarded a small custom-made catamaran made from 2 local canoes. It was filled with their equipment and collection. They needed to cross about 16 kilometers of sea before reaching the mainland. And as they moved away from the shore, the waves started to get stronger. After a while, water hit their engine, and that's when the real disaster began. It sputtered, then stopped, and in just a moment, a bigger wave crashed into them. The catamaran flipped over, and in an instant, Michael and Vasing were already in the sea. They clung to the overturned hull of the boat while their belongings were slowly being swept away. The situation was bad. They were about 10 kilometers from the shore, and the current was strong. To make matters worse, the sea in that area was known for sharks and saltwater crocodiles. They didn't have a radio to call for help right away, so all they could do was hold on. The night passed, and then it was day again. They were soaked in salty water for more than 24 hours while being exposed to intense heat. Gradually, they became thirsty, weak, and their skin started to burn. And as each hour passed, the possibility of being swept farther away from the shore increased. For Vasing, the best decision was clear: stay with the boat. It's easier for a search plane to spot a large object than a person in the middle of the sea. But for Michael, waiting wasn't enough. He could see the shore in the distance and believed he could reach it. Vasing tried to stop him. It was very far, and the current was strong. And even if he made it to land, he didn't know which part of Asmat territory he would end up in. He even told Vasing, "I think I can make it." The young man was confident that if he made it to land, his family would use all their resources to find him. Michael took off almost all his clothes until only his red underwear was left. Afterwards, he took 2 empty gallons and tied them to his body to serve as an improvised flotation device. He was also carrying steel axes, locally called palakas. Then he jumped into the sea. Vasing watched as Michael's head gradually became smaller among the waves until it completely disappeared from his sight. The next day, the Dutch search aircraft found the overturned Catamaran. Vasing was still alive. He was rescued, and when they found out that Michael wasn't there, a massive rescue mission immediately began. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, arrived. He chartered an entire airplane, a Boeing 707. Dutch military ships and airplanes arrived, along with helicopters, journalists, and local search parties. Thousands of square kilometers of sea and coastline were searched. But after almost 10 days, they couldn't find Michael. No body, no fuel can, no trace at all. On November 28, the massive search was called off. The most accepted explanation is that he drowned. But what they didn't know was that Michael didn't die at sea. He made it to shore. And the place he reached was the territory of the Ootjanep, the tribe that had recently been enemies of the Dutch soldiers. After swimming for many hours in the strong current, using only 2 fuel cans as a flotation device, Michael reached the muddy shore. He was extremely exhausted, soaked, dehydrated, and possibly struggling to stand. But he was alive. The problem was, it wasn't the rescue team who found him first. There was a group of Ootjanep men in their canoes when they saw a white man on the shore. Just a few years earlier, several prominent men of the tribe had been killed by Dutch patrol officers. From their perspective, such a death does not simply end. There is a blood debt, an act of revenge that must be carried out to restore spiritual balance. And now, from the sea itself, a white man has arrived. They don't know he's Rockefeller. They don't know he's one of the richest heirs in America. And above all, they have no reason to think that a powerful family is looking for him. To them, he was just an outsider from the same world as the Dutch soldiers. And the steel axes, a few shotgun bullets, and trade supplies he brought with him might have only reminded them even more of the weapons used to kill members of their tribe. Suddenly, the warriors moved. Michael had no time to run. One of them, a man called Finn, or Pep, was the first to approach. He raised his spear and thrust it into Michael's side. Michael staggered back. He was exhausted from the long swim. He barely had any strength left to fight. He was quickly surrounded. A member of the group approached him, a high-status warrior named Ajim. And in just a moment, it was all over. Michael was killed by beheading. But for the warriors of Ootjanep, this was not simply the killing of a stranger. It was part of an older system of revenge, an act of ritual revenge that, for them, needed to be carried out to restore balance after their village leaders were killed several years ago. Afterwards, they took Michael's body. It was divided according to their ceremonial tradition, and some parts were ritually consumed. But there is one more detail that is even more horrifying. Not all of Michael's bones were thrown away. Some of his large bones were set aside, cleaned, shaped, and made into ritual tools and bone daggers. And this is where the very dark irony of Michael Rockefeller's story comes in. He traveled from New York to New Guinea because he became fascinated with Asmat wood carvings. He wanted to collect their shields, ancestral poles, and ceremonial art. But in the end, it was his own bones that became tools that could be used for making them. The same kind of art he went there to collect. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, the world believed a different story. For the Rockefeller family, for the media, and for the public, Michael drowned at sea. No body, no evidence was found by the search teams, so the case gradually closed. But for Oates Genep, what happened was no longer a secret. Just a few weeks later, Catholic missionary priests began to hear strange rumors. They came from the people there, and it wasn't just simple gossip. There were even names of warriors. There were exact details about what happened on the beach. There were stories about how the body was divided. Some of Michael's belongings even ended up with the people telling the story. And as more and more information came out, a disturbing picture began to form. So the missionaries made a detailed secret report and sent it to the Dutch colonial authorities. And its conclusion could change the entire story of Michael Rockefeller's disappearance. He did not die at sea. He made it to shore and was killed by a fierce tribe. But if the missionaries already knew what possibly happened to Michael, why didn't they immediately tell the whole world, especially to the Rockefeller family? That's because in 1961, the Netherlands was facing a much bigger problem. They were gradually losing control over Dutch New Guinea. Indonesia wanted to take control of it, while the Dutch government was trying to convince the United Nations and America that they could govern and make the territory safe. So just imagine the headline: the son of a billionaire and the governor of New York killed and eaten by a tribe in a territory controlled by the Netherlands. This would be a huge political disaster. The reports from the missionaries about Oates Genep were not released to the public. The details about the alleged death of Michael remain in government files, while the official explanation remains simple. Michael Rockefeller most likely drowned. Eventually, the Netherlands also lost control of Dutch New Guinea in 1962. Control of the territory was transferred, and eventually, it became part of Indonesia. But the mystery of Michael Rockefeller never died. Decades passed. Countless journalists and researchers continued to dig into old testimonies and government records. One of the most well-known among them is Carl Hoffman, who reconstructed the case in his book, Savage Harvest. And there's another strange twist. In 1969, the writer Milt Macklin went to New Guinea to find out whether Michael Rockefeller might still be alive. While filming, they captured a group of Asmat paddling a canoe. But there was one person among them who stood out. He had fair skin, was naked, and was paddling together with the Asmat. Because of this, the question quickly spread: was that Michael Rockefeller? Some people thought that maybe he wasn't killed. Maybe he was kept alive and became part of the Oates Genep tribe. However, for many researchers, it's more likely that this was just a local man with albinism. Up to now, there's no solid evidence proving that the man in the video was Michael. But that's the reason why the mystery lives on. Today, you can find the Michael C. Rockefeller wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where many works from Africa, Oceania, and Asmat culture are displayed. All his life, Michael wanted to make a name for himself, separate from the Rockefeller wealth. In the end, he did, not because of business, not because of politics, but because of an expedition that until now still has not been fully explained. And for us Filipinos, there's a simple lesson here. It's good to dream, to be adventurous, and to make a name for yourself. But let's not mistake courage for complacency, no matter how much money, connections, or power we have. When we enter a world we don't fully understand, we still need to respect nature, culture, and the dangers that are there. Because there are places in the world where your last name and wealth mean nothing. If you liked this video, please share it with others and subscribe as well. Also, watch the videos on the right so you can waste even more of your time.